Welcome back, TCSTV viewers. Chris Niccolls here from the camera store. And of course, as you can see beside me, Jordan Drake.
I can introduce myself. I'm Jordan.
No, I'm going to do it. And this is the long-awaited FS5 review. I know you guys have been thinking this is never coming. We're always alluding to it. Well, here it is. Now, of course, Jordan is the primary user of the FS5. My job is just to look pretty and talk a bit. So what I'm going to do...
Doing a great job already.
Thank you. I'm going to interview Jordan, because he is a world-famous YouTube director. I'm going to interview...
Not the case as well.
It is. Our videos are seen across the world. You're the director of our videos. That makes you world famous.
Well, let's just keep going.
Yeah, well, let's keep going. So I'm going to interview Jordan. We are going to answer the questions about the FS5. We've got a very special segment for you at the end as well, so stay tuned for that. And without further ado, let's get to it. All right, Jordan, so how long have we been shooting the FS5 for TCSTV?
Well, we've been using it about a year at this point. And we've always been like, we got to do that FS5 review, got to do it. But the thing with this is there were just constant firmware updates for it. And the thing is, they said, we've got firmware coming to give you this feature. So it didn't come out surprise. So we were always like, we're going to push it back till we get that firmware. New firmware comes out, they say, in the next firmware, we got this exciting feature.
Which is great,
which is awesome.
When you're trying to make a review and give the viewers like the complete camera.
Exactly. It felt like there was never a good time. Now seems like it is. Finally, fully upgraded, ready to go.
Until next week.
Yeah, so let's talk about it.
Well, what is the best thing about the FS5? I mean, what is it that you really love about this camera?
We use the FS7 quite a bit.
Yeah.
And really, the form factor for that is a problem for the way we like to shoot. And it's a lot on the street. We've been bringing more like gimbals and stuff like that into our shooting. And it's a big, bulky body. So with the FS5, they've shrunk things down significantly. Really kind of like the Canon C series, like the C100, C300 cameras. A lot smaller. Built-in viewfinder makes a big difference for me, as opposed to strapping those loops that are easy to break on there. And the other huge one is this shoots to SD cards, because we are constantly fighting with the XQD formats. You know, we do long takes, interviews like right now where we ramble on and on and on, not getting to a point. And it is really nice to just have cheap media that we can grab in a pinch, you know, if we're traveling or something like that.
I mean, I think a big thing people have to remember about video, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I never am, is that when you're doing video, image quality is important, but so much so the workflow and the ability to get these videos out quickly, especially in the nature of our business.
Exactly. Right? Well, the usability for what we're doing, because I'm generally the only person on set, unless we're incredibly fortunate and Levi shows up like today.
Right now. Thanks, Levi.
Thank you, Levi. The other thing I really love about this body is it's very customizable. You know, if I did want to, you know, for example, pop off the grip here, it actually has like a bayonet release. So,
look at that. Nice
done, just pops right off.
Right.
Stick a handle with the top handle. Angle, so, you know, if we do have to customize the way we're shooting, it's very quick and easy to do that.
So yeah, we love the small form factor, but tell us about the button controls, handling that kind of stuff.
Well, it's nice. With all of these Sony professional cameras, they generally put the stuff that you're going to need to access quickly with its own dedicated button, which is a nice change coming from like the mirrorless cameras or something like that, where it's a lot of menu diving. I mean, Sony menus, like if you think they're bad on the consumer side, the pro side, and this is a better menu than the higher end, like the F5, F55, FS7
they're
menus.
So confusing.
They're laggy. This is quite a bit better, but it's still a nightmare. Some of the phrasing doesn't make any sense. So it's nice to have quick access to everything. And it's still quite customizable. You got a lot of custom buttons on here.
Yeah, I mean, I see you got slow and quick. You got your white balance controls with presets, your ISO, which is customizable.
Yeah, everything's fairly standard, and it's the stuff you're regularly going to have to jump to. I also really like that if you need to tweak, for example, your ISO or your white balance or something like that, you can just very quickly hit the function button and use your thumbstick, and you can change that, as opposed to having to go into the menus, set what your low, medium, and high ISOs are, which you had to do on the other cameras. Same thing with white balance. You can just manually dial in your kelvins. It's really intuitive.
All back to that easy workflow.
Exactly. Lets us work quick, which is important for what we're doing in camera store TV. But the standout feature, I mean, it doesn't jump out to you looking at it, but we click this ND here, set it to variable, and we can run this dial and get smooth electronic neutral density filter.
Completely variable, right?
Completely.
You can hard stop it, or you can totally just completely variable.
And what I really love with that as well, when it shipped, it was strictly a manual function. But now you can actually set it to auto electronic ND.
Right.
So let's suppose we know that creatively we want this specific shutter speed, we want a native ISO for Slog 2 or 3, whatever we're shooting.
Particular depth of field,
and we know our shutter angle's fixed. We can just let the camera handle exposure in a way that doesn't impact creatively what we're trying to do with the image.
Now, this is the first camera from Sony to have this feature.
first big chip camera.
Big chip camera. Do you see this hopefully appearing on all the video cameras?
I want it on, I don't care video cameras, I want this on every camera. This changes the way you shoot in a huge way, speeds everything up. I mean, it's funny, Levi, who's operating the FS7 right now, has been shooting with the FS5 recently, and he's immediately bitching about having to go back to dedicated 2, 4, 6 stop ND filters.
And even for photography, you know, on mirrorless cameras, for example, yeah, that could actually be
incredibly
a really
useful
nice feature.
I mean, I'm sure it's expensive to implement, but hopefully that'll come down in price. And we're already starting to see mount adapters like the Aperture with the electronic ND in it.
Regardless, fantastic technology.
It's a huge, huge benefit.
Now, of course, audio is such a big deal on a camera, you know, how it works and how it operates. And I know people on the internet, aren't they going to slam the FS5 because it only has the one XLR port on the body itself?
I don't know what people those would be, because I actually really love that you've got an XLR up on the top handle here, and they keep one on the body in case you are doing like a gimbal shot or something like that, or just keeping your kit as small as possible. You still have a proper audio input. I hate when they put both of them on the top handles. You pull that out to work a little smaller and you now have no audio inputs or like a crummy 3.5 jack.
Okay, so outside of the camera, we've talked about quite a bit. Anything that you don't really like very much then?
Well, the screens on this flippy outy one, I like that you can reposition it all over the place. It's on a 1/4-20, but it's not the sharpest display, and it washes out very quick. Like, it's not a bright display at all. You know, there's some that people complain about, like the old Atomos displays. This guy's even dimmer than those, so really tough to see, which is why I'm glad they've included a viewfinder on this. Right. But it's a viewfinder. It's very small, it's low resolution. I mean, it's crazy. If you want a better built-in electronic viewfinder than this, you can buy like a Sony A6300.
Oh, what, like this?
Like that. And I mean,
you're telling me this is better than
this
that?
This $1,300 Canadian camera has a way better viewfinder than this thing. And it's great they included it. I love it because when I want to shoot with a small body, I can tear the whole screen off and use it like almost a DSLR.
I mean, regardless, it's not an FS100 anymore. Am I right? Am I right?
Oh, yeah, that was
pretty bad.
Yeah. So as you guys know, I don't do a lot of adventure filmmaking, anything like that.
Jordan is probably dead because he doesn't have any gear and he has no idea what he's doing when it comes to being a man.
So I brought in Keith Partidge, done Human Planet, Touching the Void, adventure cinematographer. What do you think of this camera?
Well, this little puppy, the 5, I think has got a lot of really fantastic points and a few points which are not quite so good. In the adventure film game, obviously we want fast cameras, smooth and easy to operate cameras that are light. This is absolutely fantastic for that. The variable ND is one of those things which we've all been waiting for a very, very long time. It's absolutely genius. The fact that it is so small and it feels really comfortable in the hand is absolutely fabulous. And the price point, I mean, it's almost like become a disposable camera. You don't really, well for me.
To a point.
To a point, you know. The points where it really lets itself down is the viewfinders. I mean, this back-end viewfinder here is something like we might have seen on a VHS camcorder back in the 80s, so it's going a bit retro here. Really, it's not good for seeing anything. Yeah. And the flip out here it's a little better, but it's, in my mind, it's small. And of course, if you're shooting 4K and you need absolute critical focus, it's a bit tricky. And this punch-in, punch-out business in the real world, it doesn't quite work, does it? The frame rate though, the fact you can do burst at high speed is, again, a really fantastic feature. So yeah, so nobody's actually really made the perfect camera yet. We all know that they can, but nobody's managed to think...
They got to segment stuff.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
So you could see this totally being a good camera for adventure filmmakers.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact is it feels very robust. It doesn't feel flimsy.
Yeah, feels solid in the hand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you get a chance, check out Keith's work and definitely take a look at his book, The Adventure Game, which is available. You can grab it from the camera store and it's available worldwide. Keith, thanks for coming on and talking to us.
Oh, thanks. Great.
Now, Jordan, even I know that the FS5, that the FS5, compared to cameras like the FS7 and the F5, same chip, but we're not getting the same codec. We're not getting the same bit rate, right? There's some issues
That's the big compromise.
So tell us about all the 420s and the 422s and the 444s and all that business going on in the FS5.
All the stuff you don't understand. I got you. Okay. So the FS7 does do 4K 10-bit 422, and that's one of its major strengths. And that's kind of the trade-off when we go down to this, is we get an 8-bit 420 signal when we record 4K. Same thing we see in like the A7S2 or the A6300. They're consumer cameras. And it is definitely a bit of a hit. And this is kind of, I liken this to kind of two cameras, because you've got that more compressed color space shooting 4K, but then if we switch it to 1080, we get 10-bit 422. Now initially that did have some issues, and when it first shipped, you got some weird horizontal noise patterns, some banding issues, and they brought out firmware fairly quickly to resolve that. And this is really interesting because I've said for the longest time, I would much rather have better color space than more resolution. So this is the test of that. You know, after using it for a year, what have I shot more? And it's definitely been the 1080 10-bit on it.
When we're able to, right? When we don't need 4K, that's
sometimes,
your preferable
if
choice,
we're reviewing a 4K camera, I'm going to be like,
have to
okay,
shoot 4K.
we got to shoot in 4K, so everything matches up. But if we've got the choice, I do prefer to shoot the 10-bit. And I certainly find if we're looking at like skin tones where we're pushing them a little bit, the 4K, especially if you shoot S-Log 3, I find it not terribly usable. I only like to shoot S-Log 2.
Right.
Because you have to push that S-Log 3 so far, the color starts to break apart. Where the 10-bit 1080, I find very usable in S-Log 3. It's almost exactly like working with the bigger FS7.
Okay, so then here's a question. What about taking the 4K 420, downsampling it to 1080, compared to just shooting native 1080?
Yeah, one of the things that people always complain about when you're shooting those compressed color spaces is things like banding in the sky, stuff like that. And when you shoot 4K, you've got a little extra information there. No extra color information, but I do find it minimizes that quite a bit compared to like a 1080 8-bit camera.
Okay.
So it helps quite a bit with that. But I do still find it doesn't help when I'm doing those big pushes like we talked about. Shooting especially S-Log 3, where we're putting in a lot of saturation, maybe shifting the color a little bit. Those skin tones I still find just get a little, just primary color, not very subtle tonality to it. And I still find the 1080 has an advantage for that, which is why we keep going back to shooting in the 1080 record mode.
Now, just really quick too, what would you say, based on the comparison you made, 4K 8-bit 420 here compared to A6300 footage, for example, or A7 or Mark II footage, for example?
That's where things get a little trickier. I know. The thing we have to remember that I think a lot of people forget is this chip is getting old. I mean, the F5 came out, was that 3 years? Like it was a few Christmases ago that we shot with that the first time. And we're seeing so many new cameras. I mean, the 6500 just got announced, right? We're seeing all these cameras getting punched out on the consumer side. So this sensor is getting a little longer in the tooth. And the dynamic range on it I still find excellent, but those deepest shadows aren't quite as clean as what we'll see with something like the A7S2. And high ISO performance, even the A6300 outperforms it at this point. But this is a very consistent sensor. You don't find it has any issues with overheating. And one big thing is there's very little wobble in the footage, and that's always been the case with these. And I love that because we're shooting on a monopod so often. You don't see a lot of the jello effect that we do so often run into with the A6300 on our B cam.
Now, of course, one of the biggest changes that we got so recently, and one of the reasons why we keep putting out the FS5 review, is they were announcing and then finally delivered that they were going to give us external recording, basically raw recording, to an external recorder. So tell us, how has that changed this camera for you?
Yeah, now we've got the raw update for this camera, and it is a paid firmware upgrade, which is, I mean, it's kind of a hassle. It has to be done at the store level. But I had it done to this unit that we shoot with, and we actually used the raw recording on our survival episode that we recently put up. And I kind of did a bit of a test. I didn't do a shot-for-shot comparison between the two, but I shot half the episode with the internal compression, half with the raw. And when I was editing, and I was even showing you this with the final copy, is I definitely feel like in terms of skin tones, there's a big difference. Certainly in terms of resolution. Yeah. But the raw files coming off this, like any 4K raw signal, they're absolutely huge. So we've shot some raw footage to the convergent design, and it's great because you can play with the white balance. It's truly a raw signal. But I think how we'll work most of the time is we shot it out to the Atomos Shogun and had it convert to ProRes. Now,
instantly in the converter.
Now you got to get your white balance in the ballpark. But again, I'm shooting it and I'm grading it, so I know roughly where I want things to be sitting. And I found that you get all the advantages in terms of the resolution. Skin
Beautiful
tones are really
tonal range.
exactly. Especially greens, I find these can really struggle with. Looked really beautiful on the raw footage, where it was a little bit more of that oversaturated primary kind of green when I applied the same color corrections to it.
Right.
So there's big advantages. The nice thing is, if you want the color space in 4K that the FS7 that's filming us offers, then strap on a Shogun or another external recorder, anything that can capture raw, and you've got access to that. So it's kind of two cameras in one. Generally, I'm not a huge fan of using external recording, but I mean, if I want that beautiful raw signal and I want that electronic ND I love to death, then this gives you both in one package.
Now, the FS5 does have S-Log 2 and S-Log 3, and for the longest time, this was simply the realm of the commercial camera, but now we're finding in a lot of smaller consumer cameras,
Yeah,
right?
they're starting to add that feature, and I love it. Like, one of the big battles we always have is dynamic range, because we don't tend to light stuff. I can't control the light a lot of the time. But a lot of people are confused as to how those actually work. So we've had S-Log 2 for quite a while, and it's a really good log profile for working with these more compressed cameras, these 8-bit. You know, that's what I like to use when I'm shooting 4K. It gives you a very flat tone curve, but it's not so flat that you have to really stretch the image to get something usable. So we use that whenever we're shooting 4K, and that's what I tend to use on the consumer cameras. What I do really love about the 10-bit 422 or shooting the raw out to an external recorder is you can then use that S-Log 3 and you've got enough color information there to really pull that out, and it gives you a big benefit in terms of your dynamic range.
Right.
Now, again, this is an older chip, so you'll see more noise relative to like an A7S2 or an A6300. So you do still want to overexpose, which is something we've talked about. If you want, you can watch our S-Log or log video, how to work with that stuff. But I also really like that they've given you some other profiles.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, you know, you tend to go to S-Log 2 and S-Log 3 on the videos based on how much contrast we're getting in the light.
Exactly.
But if you can get away with it, you honestly often prefer things like Picture Profile 6 and stuff like that. So tell us how that works and how that's similar to the consumer cameras and what they have.
Yeah, no, and again, this isn't a full review of all the different color profiles. This is how I like to use it when we're out shooting. And I've really fallen in love with Picture Profile 6, which is their Cine 2 profile. It's fairly flat, not overly punchy, but great in low light. Does a really nice job with that. So if we're shooting any darker situations, handles it really nicely. Good skin tones on it, but you do still have to play with those files a little bit. If it's just shoot it, deliver it directly, then Picture Profile 2 is very punchy. It's that classic Sony broadcast kind of look, and it's nice to have the option. But for most people, I find that Cine 2 profile is what we shoot. Most of the stuff when we don't have to fight the contrast. If it's a very high dynamic range shot, then we're going to jump over to S-Log 2 or S-Log 3, depending on whether we're 4K or 1080 recording.
Now, the FS7 did have amazing slow motion capability.
That's one of my favorite things about it.
Absolutely. But the FS5, they did incorporate some. Tell us how it's a bit different from the FS7 and, you know, what you like and don't like about it.
And it's a bit of a step down from the 7 in a few regards. So the 7, one of the things it was famous for and why it's used so much for documentary work is you could record continuous slow-mo. 180 frames per second and just keep on rolling. And it also gave you some slow-mo in 4K. It gave you 60 frames per second slow-mo. That's gone on this guy, unfortunately. Now with the RAW update, we do have access to 4K 60 through that. We can do 240 frames per second all day, shooting the RAW 2K signal out. Which is
crazy.
Which is awesome as well. But internally, there are definitely some limitations. 4K, you're just capped at 30 frames per second. And when you're shooting 1080, you've got 240 frames per second, but shot to a buffer. So it's quick bursts of that. Now, one thing that a lot of people were confused about is what the color space is when you're doing that. But this is what's really sweet. This is, since it's 1080, when you're shooting slow-mo, you're getting 10-bit 422 color, which puts it way above a lot of the other slow-mo cams, and the quality is awesome. You look at some of the consumer cams like the 6300, A7S, it's a big quality hit.
Lots of tonal range.
Yeah, exactly. This is still very sharp. There's no crop factor when we shoot the slow-mo. It's a very flexible, well thought out mode in terms of what you can get out of it. What's not well thought out is the entire interface for it. So when you set everything up, if you go into the menu to change anything or go out of shooting at any point, power the camera down, go back and play a clip, it takes you out of slow motion recording. Which has bit me on the ass so many times. I'll shoot something, go in to double check something in my menus, come back, hit record, and I've got some lovely.
And you're like, what the hell?
But my shutter, but it keeps my shutter speed at a 500th of a second. So now I got this useless jerky video, and it happens all the time. Really poorly thought out. And I mean, this is feedback we've been giving Sony since the FS700. and it's still there, all these firmware updates
Easy
later.
to fix, yeah.
I know, it seems like something they should definitely have addressed by this point. So I've been talking about this camera the way that we would use it, shooting camera store TV. So it's kind of like a run and gun, semi-documentary style. But this is a cinema camera, and it's part of Sony's cinema line, and I want to test it in that capacity as well.
But we just never have the budget or the time to be able to make and script and direct and crew an entire movie, right? Just
Exactly. For a review, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we found what I think is a good workaround.
Yeah, well, we're going to see.
We're introducing a new segment. We're calling it Wooden Niccolls.
Yes. We're going to take famous scenes, and what Jordan's going to do is he's going to try to light it and shoot it almost exactly the same, which means I'm going to have to try and put myself in the position of some of the world's best actors of all time. And we're going to see if you guys at home can see the difference between the real thing and what we have.
Also, we're throwing no money at props, locations, anything like that, and Chris is going to wow us all.
I'm going to do my best. So you tell us, because here comes our first Wooden Niccolls episode ever.
Okay, so we're recording Leonardo DiCaprio's death scene from Blood Diamond. Chris is gonna hack his ass off on this thing. And this is one issue that I've got with the FS5. It's got an S-gamma gamut display mode where it shows you what a graded image might look like when you're shooting log, but won't let you adjust exposure, so you always wind up, you want to overexpose log, you look at an overexposed image. Fortunately, we're recording raw to ProRes today, so I'm using the Shogun. Here, I can adjust the brightness of it, and we can see this is actually going to look, hopefully, quite similar to the movie. We've also got it on a motion control unit so we can do a nice long slow movement because I don't really have a lot of crew out here today. We're going to give it a try and see how we do. So unfortunately we're trying to fake really warm Zimbabwe light, but it's freezing cold and the sun went behind a cloud, so now it's all turning very blue on us. But this is going to be great. We're really going to see how much we can push the log file from this, see if we can make it look somewhat warmer. Be kind of interesting. Chris is freezing, so hope we can get this. One last shot. Nice close-up.
All right, so it's time to start working on some of that footage we shot the other night. And we have our work cut out for us because we were hoping for really high contrast magic hour light. Sun dipped behind a cloud right when we started to shoot. So we've got a few issues. First of all, we have no contrast in the shot, which was really key in the original one. More importantly, though, and why we really need to push the files from this, we shot blue light, basically, with the sun behind the cloud, and we're trying to emulate a very warm, golden Africa light, which is where the movie takes place. All right, so I cut all of our Camera Store TV stuff in Final Cut. I really like the interface. I find I can work very quickly with it, but the built-in color correction tools aren't the best. So I use the Color Finale plugin quite a bit. It gives me curves, it gives me a three-way color corrector, but one thing I really like is I can drop LUTs in within that. And looking at our starting footage, you can see it's very cold, no contrast whatsoever, so I need to warm that up. My starting point, I'm going to use the SpeedLooks Gold Heat LUT. We're going to drop that one in, and you can see if I put it at full strength, my skin tones are shot. So I need to tone that back a little bit. We'll scale it back, but then I'm going to put in my highlights a bit of yellow, and in my shadows a little bit of red. And that's still going to keep things nice and warm for us, but my skin tones aren't going to be affected too much. And looking at it right here, you can see we've made a huge improvement. Might not look exactly like a movie shot at magic hour on motion picture film, but it's a pretty dramatic improvement. Now as well, I framed this shot wider than I should have. So we're going to be cropping a little bit. We have a slider move already, but I'm going to use a digital zoom on top of that to kind of accentuate the movement. And that's pretty resolution demanding. But we look at it here, things are very, very sharp in the 4K, and pushing it in, we're getting close to the 1080 level of resolution, but it's still very sharp, holds together very well. I really like the files coming off of this. But honestly, do I wish I'd shot raw for this? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know we were going to be pushing the color nearly as far as we did, so it's nice to know you've got the option of raw recording with the firmware update on this. But even shooting raw to ProRes, it's very impressive how much I can push these files, and certainly an FS7 recording internally wouldn't do a better job. So if you are using this as a filmmaking camera, I think it's going to fulfill most of your needs. You know, high budget work, things like that. Can't push it as hard as something like a Red shooting raw, But certainly for most applications, this is very usable, and we can grade these files very heavily.
I'm saying, you've got a real story now. You can write the hell out of it. I'm really happy I met you. You know that?
Yeah, I'm really happy I met you too. And I wish I could be there with you.
Oh, that's all right. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So I think what we've learned is whatever limitations the FS5 had, with this new upgrade, the firmware, the RAW, the external recorder, that actually does mitigate a lot of the issues that it was dealing with.
Yeah,
right?
I think there was much more segmentation between the 5 and the 7 initially. But now, I mean, I can still see the place for the 7 because it is nice to be able to record that 4K internally in that better color space. And external recording has its limitations. You know, if you have a bad cable or something like that and it takes up a lot more space, it's less efficient to record externally.
For sure, but if you're shooting 10-bit, for example, a 1080, there's no real difference between that and
I
the
was
FS5's
shocked by
10-bit.
that because it's a much higher data rate on the FS7. I thought we'd see a better 1080p image, but honestly, between the two, even after heavy grading, which really surprised me. So I do think, yeah, the 7 is becoming more and more of a specialized tool. For me personally, especially shooting camera store TV stuff all the time, I think it would make sense to grab an FS5 and strap on an external recorder and get the RAW update for the same price as an FS7.
And then you could do the opposite. I mean, with the FS5, you can also strip it all down and you get this tiny body.
Yeah.
You still have the one XLR for audio. You can throw it on a gimbal or on a glide cam or anything like that.
If you do that, it's not that different from a DSLR, and it draws a lot less attention on the street. We know from personal experience, you show up on the street with an FS7, everyone's asking what you're up to. With the 5, you can get away with being a lot more discreet.
And do you think you could ever go back to hard-stopped ND filters?
Never. I have no follow-up.
Okay, so now compared with the competition, what do we think about that?
In the case of the A7S II, you are getting cleaner blacks when you're shooting S-Log 2 and S-Log 3. Which makes that dynamic range more usable, that wider dynamic range. But just in terms of low light performance, I mean, my little A6300 does do a better job.
Yeah, so that's the trick. I mean, do you think we're going to have a new cinema camera coming out, or do you think mirrorless cameras are just going to get better and better and better? Which way are they going to push?
I think that we're going to see a big revamp, but I think we'll see it on the F5, F55 series first, and then some stuff start to trickle down. So for the time being, the FS5 is still an extremely capable camera, but you do need to know you're making some sacrifices. The good news is those sacrifices can be filled with an inexpensive mirrorless camera instead of buying another cinema camera.
And it's always good to have a B cam as well.
Exactly.
So I guess that brings us down to who is the FS5 for.
Right.
And I know you've got a lot of exciting cameras now in the mirrorless market, you know, and you've got a lot of cameras bigger than this with the F5 and the F55, but from my own personal experience, when customers are coming in and they're looking for a camera that can do documentary work, they need audio inputs, you know, they want to be able to do some commercial stuff or something a little bit more cinematic, this just ticks so many checkmark boxes. I think it's an ideal camera for any sort of commercial shooter.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at how we've used it in the last year. We've used it as kind of a run and gun documentary camera. We've used it for lit, kind of more commercial, corporate style stuff, and some filmmaking as well. And it handles all of those very, very well. I kind of consider this a graduate camera from a mirrorless. I would say shoot with those guys until you feel like you're hitting the wall. It's starting to slow you down. And of course, appearances do matter. So it's nice to show up for a client with a little bit of a larger camera, you know.
Yeah,
that is the truth.
It is the truth, yeah. I think too, you know, I mean, having the variable ND is incredible, but even the old school hard stopped NDs are infinitely better than rummaging for variable NDs you have to screw in, or, you know, having to screw in and out filters with different filter sizes.
Or plug a matte box on one of those small cameras.
You know, absolutely.
It's a big deal. And also, this is a great gate gateway to better color space.
Right.
You know, in 1080, you're getting that 10-bit 422. And once you're used to that, I know I certainly find I do really miss it. And on the 4K side of things, you've got that expandability. So, you know, this might be all the camera you need today. Down the road, you find you're really looking for that better color space in 4K. Drop a recorder on there, and it is actually a pretty straightforward setup.
It's nice to see that Sony is still servicing these cameras. You know, they're coming out with new upgrades that people are going to want. They're updating things. Menu aside,
Menus are terrible.
and that is still probably the biggest complaint on these cameras is just the interface and menu. But you get used to it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you've
absolutely.
gotten used to it, yeah.
I can work my way through, and you can customize that a little bit too. But ergonomically, I love working with this camera. It always just disappears into my hands, and I do still think for under 10 grand, it's probably the most well-rounded option right now.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you guys got a lot out of that for the FS5 review, and you know, maybe that'll help you make a decision on buying your own. As usual, talk to us.
Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. If you like the Wooden Niccolls, feel free to recommend some other scenes you would like to see Chris try.
Oh man, yeah, any sort of monologues you'd like me to try, I will take a good hard look at it.
Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again soon.
See you soon.